not just being able to communicate in the lens perspective that you come from, but trying to communicate to understand somebody else's perspective, being open to receive that feedback. Don't take it so personally, right? Don't just take it as an attack as you as a person. What's up, everybody? Welcome to another fresh CFO Fridays. I'm Chris Ortega. Yeah, excited to be here today. I'm really excited to talk with everybody about today. So let's jump right into it. Today's topic that we're going to talk about is 3 steps to becoming a better collaborator, right? And notice I said collaborator, not 3 steps to become a better calculator for finance, fractional CFOs, and FP&A professionals. So, one of the things I talked about is being a great collaborator, right? This is so important inside of finance, right? And when you look at the value proposition that the office of the CFO, that finance professionals have right now in terms of collaboration, that's one of the most important things, right? We've got to get, and it's not only like collaboration inside the finance organization, is collaboration outside of the finance organization, right? And that could be working with your business partners, that could be working with external partners, that could be working with bankers, right? The whole connective tissue that finance has right now is around that collaboration. So today, in today's fresh CFO episode, we're going to be talking about to give you 3 steps in how you could be a better collaborator. So, the first step I want to give people is this is really, really important. This first thing about being a great collaborator is you have to be open to getting feedback, right? When I look back over my career, feedback was always a constant for me. Like I was always, and it wasn't necessarily like feedback of everything that I'm doing right, right? Like everything that I'm doing right, I'm going to continue to do that. Like feedback of constructive feedback, or what are some things, what are some examples that I could do better, right? And I think this is one of the most important things of being a great collaborator is being open to that receiving party and saying, hey, say you're partnering with sales, right? You're working with the sales group, and maybe it's the sales leader's first time actually working with a finance partner that is just not knocking them across the head because they're traveling too much or they're spending too much on clients, right? They're actually working with a finance person or a CFO that wants to be more collaborative, right? And one of the best ways that you can have in that conversation is saying check in points with them, right? Like, hey, I'm open to feedback. What are some things I could be doing better? Like, what are some gaps that I could be, be a better business partner for you? What are some areas that gives you more horsepower, give you more insights? Like, you have to come to the table open to receive that feedback. And traditionally in finance, right? Like, we're the ones that are just like, we typically take things maybe as feedback from the business, or maybe feedback from your audit partner, or feedback from a banking partner, feedback externally. We kind of sometimes take that feedback personally, right? And I'm not saying that that's like, a lot of times the feedback is don't take it personally, right? Like look at it as a way of like, hey, you're sharing with me like constructive ways to get better, and I'm going to accept that feedback, right? And I struggle with this, right? Like a lot of times I take feedback when I say I struggle with the feedback element is earlier in my career, right? I took feedback and I took it personally. I was like, man, the marketing partner that I've worked with, we did this great analysis. We worked on this like lead attribution strategy, and like all he had was just like constructive feedback. And I was just like, man, I'm not doing a good job. And I took it personally that he didn't highlight any of the other elements that I was doing well, right? And I remember sitting down with him, and he was a great marketing leader. He runs a marketing, he's a CMO now here locally in Indianapolis. He says, Chris, like, I don't want you to take the feedback that I'm giving you to derail and say you're not providing us, but I know you strive to be better, right? And like one of the most important things for you is just one thing that I've seen is that, you're not wanting to know everything you're doing well. You're constantly wanting to get better, right? But I also know, Chris, I need to probably balance that out. So we work together on a framework of feedback where it's like, okay, I'm gonna give you two maybe like two really important constructive examples, clear feedback, and I'm gonna give you one thing of feedback of you done really well, right? And this 2-to-1 ratio like really helped our relationship because it wasn't just like three things I need to get better at all the time, right? It was like, hey, Chris, here are the two most important or the two or three most important feedback items I want to give you, but here's also 1 to 2 things that you're doing really well, right? And it helps balance that. So I think in finance, you have to be open, and CFOs as well too. This is all levels within the finance organization. Being open to receive that feedback. Don't take it so personally, right? Don't just take it as an attack as you as a person, but look at it from a lens of positive intent that this person wants you to get better. And you want to be better in that relationship. You want to be better in that partnership, right? So I think that's step number one is being open to that feedback. The second thing is another important one. This is gonna hit finance people hard, right? We have to be willing to compromise, right? Let me give you an example. So, working in high growth SaaS and startup kind of companies and tech companies, one of the compromising we always made was with sales, right? Like, yeah, you're working in a high growth business, you're trying to cross that chasm of getting new customers, right? And sometimes you have salespeople that are, they looking at that, they're looking at that contract and they're like, hey, we need to send them stuff. We need to have this great dinner. We need to have these multiple runs. We need to go visit them. And in finance, right, you're looking at all this cost that's going into this particular prospect or this particular vertical or this particular territory, right? And sometimes I would sit back and say, Chris, like, don't go into completely like, why are we spending this much money? Why are we doing this? Like, find ways to compromise, right? Like find which battles do you really want to go down and which ones do you kind of want to understand a little bit more and say, all right, I'll be a little bit more flexible in that, right? And one of the things I sat down with our sales leader with was like, hey man, like let's come up with a way of where it makes sense based on the particular prospect that we're looking at, right? So if we're looking at, a $2 to $5,000 MRR, which is a 33, 24,000 to $60,000 ARR contract, right? How can we come together and find what's a reasonable prospecting expense kind of timeline with that, right? Like if we're looking at MRR contract that's like 6 figures or 7 figures, that's a different story, right? But where can we find like common ground where it makes sense, where your team still feels empowered and still feels like they can go have the conversations and make that investment in the client and do those things, but it's also within reason based on the particular prospect contract that we're looking at, right? So that was a compromise that we made, right? It wasn't me going to the salesperson and saying, no, 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 this is it. If you go above this, like we've got to escalate this. Like you've got to have that flexibility to compromise and say like you're not going to agree on everything, right? Like finance and the business, we're not going to probably see eye to eye on every single item, but which one of those are the most ones we want to be flexible on, and which ones do we need to be very, 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 very direct and like, hey, man, this is where we need to make sure we're tight, but here's where I'm willing to flex and like come into that conversation. And most importantly, like having that conversation, right? Don't just immediately go to your business partners and say, nope, this is like, here's my laundry list of 10 different things, and I need you to do all 10 of them, right? I think one of the common misconceptions business partners and work a lot of times with CFOs is like, and in finance organizations is we're so much about commanding the business. Like we command the business to do things. We need to be more obviously collaborative. And a big step in that is making sure that we're open to compromise, right? Like we're willing to find elements where it's like, hey, I'm gonna meet you where you are on these sets of topics, right? I'm gonna meet you where you are in terms of investment that you're gonna have in prospecting. I'm gonna meet you where you are in terms of technology adoption that you want to have in your team, right? I'm gonna meet you where you are in terms of bringing on more talent in your organization, right? I'm gonna meet you there, but my ask is you meet me on these elements, right? That when we're looking at prospecting, here's the kind of budgets that we want to look at, right? If we're looking at technology adoptions, here's from a contract perspective, we want finance to be involved with this. So I'm going to meet you where you are, but also I want you to meet me on some elements as well too, right? So it's that constant like balance. And sometimes in finance, and I'm going to tell everybody right now and everybody watching this, right? Sometimes those you have to look at the better and longer term good of making that compromise, right? Like, and you have to think strategically about it. It's like, man, if I'm really pushing this, what could be the short term, midterm, and long term outcome of our relationship, right? Because a lot of times you can go down what I call like one way doors, where it's like you go through that door, you're not coming back from it, right? And I like to keep collaborative relationships as like two-way doors, right? You can go through it, you can come back out of it, you can go through it, come back out of it. There's this constant like fluidity in terms of how we collaborate. But the most important point around that is that starts with being willing to compromise, right? And I gave you some use cases around it, right? Don't command so much of the business. Don't command so much in that relationship and that business partnership that you have. Make sure you're willing to come to the table to meet the business partners, your external stakeholders, the people that you work with in finance. Make sure you want it willing to meet them where they are, right? Um, and the third thing, and this I think goes even not just with finance organizations, right? I think this goes broadly, right? One of the third steps is, in terms of being a great collaborator, is communication, right? Like this to me, and I was out at the World Finance. Shout out to the World Finance Forum out in Fort Lauderdale that I was at, and I talked about one of the great superpowers that fresh CFOs of the future have, and part of that collaboration, man, is really having authentic, honest, and vulnerable conversations, right? Like when you're willing to say, and I think one of the best ways to come across as a great collaborator, I always use a phrase where it's like, hey, like I'm struggling. Can you help me understand how this element of your business or how this element of the process or why help me understand why you're driving this strategy and tactic, right? That phrase in terms of a communication and when you're collaborating with somebody, that comes from a place of like, hey, like I'm really like I'm struggling. I'm raising my hand and saying I'm needing help. Can you help me understand that? Right? Like that's a great way of being a great collaborator is that phrase right there. Is like how, hey, help me understand this, or like I'm struggling to see this bigger picture, or I'm not really following what you're saying. Can you explain it to me a little bit better, right? I think too many times in finance, right? And I've been in this role. I've been there. So, I think it's I've been at places where it's just like I'd rather just say like I'm not gonna sit there and just nod my head and be like, yep, uh-huh, and I'm completely lost. Like I've done that before. And then you find up in a meeting, he was like, oh no, I was talking with Chris and he was nodding his head and he was saying like, he knew what I was talking about and he knew this. And I was like, yeah, right. It's better to be authentic and say, you know what? Hey, chief technology officer, I see that you're really talking technical. Can you help me better understand how this relates to this element of this technology, or how our infrastructure mapping and system mapping helps us give it a better representation of software that we need? Like, can you help me connect those dots, right? Coming from that place when you're collaborating with somebody deneutralizes like the conflict that you want to have, right? And to me it's like naturally coming in and just saying like, hey, like I don't understand it, I want to learn more about it. You're the expert at it, just the same way the business comes to us with finance stuff, right? Like they come to us and like, hey, I see like our bookings or our net dollar retention rate, can you help me understand how we look at that, how we calculate that, and how that relates to our business, right? And that communication aspect is so vital in being a great collaborator, right? Like getting outside the finance organization and being able to communicate. And I think another tip for people is not just being able to communicate in the lens perspective that you come from, but trying to communicate to understand somebody else's perspective, right? Like go to the sales partner, go to marketing, go to operations, go to HR, go to legal, go to customer support, go to client success, go to systems architect, go to solution consultants, right? Like one of the biggest things I take away from my career that is like really helping me in terms of building a lot of connections across a lot of different functional elements. with our clients and even outside with partners as well too, is I went in there and I just was like, "Hey man, like tell me, okay, you're a system solutions consultant. I'm curious, man. Tell me about some of the challenge that you face, right? Tell me about like what keeps you up, what gives you concern about the direction we may be going from a go-to-market perspective, or like what kind of clients would love to work with, right? Like a lot of that collaboration that you can have when you come from that place of just being like, "Hey, I'm naturally want to know more." Curiosity, I think is the way to say it, right? When you're coming from that place of being communicative to the point of understanding and you truly want to understand like a perspective or a viewpoint or a strategy or a tactic that may be outside of your functional element, which is finance, that automatically makes you like that's coming from a place of like, "Hey, I'm like, I don't know the answer to this, and I feel like you're the expert, so I wanna learn from you." That is completely a great step in being a collaborator, right? That is like one of like to me, that is a superpower amongst the 4 superpowers that I was talking about over at the World Finance Forum in Fort Lauderdale. That is a superpower. Communication, being open to it, coming from a place to understanding, and trying to understand authentically someone else's viewpoint. Like get in their thought process, get in their mind, get into how they're thinking, get into how that thought process or what they're talking about makes them feel. Like, what's their reaction when you talk about, sales are behind 33%? How does that salesperson feel? Like, what is their natural stance? Like, I think so much of the value that the CFO brings to the future for finance teams and for being a great collaborator is our ability to take like an empathetic view to people and also be great communicators. So to me, I think like those 3 steps of, being open to feedback, right? Like being deeply open to receive and accept, it's difficult, right? And then coming vulnerable to seek it out, right? And then the second one is being willing to compromise with all the different partners that we support, right? Like coming to the table and say, you know what, I got 10 different things. I may not get all 10 of them, but I know 5 or 6 of these are really important. And the other ones, I'm going to come from a place of willing to compromise and understand where we have some flexibility. I'm going to meet that internal business partner that I'm serving. I'm going to meet them where they are. And then the third one is open and honest and direct communication, right? To me, like those 3 steps is what makes you a great collaborator. And some other ones, like some bonus ones, being a great listener. I've talked about this a lot, man. I think, and remember I said this, I think listening for every leader is an absolute superpower. No doubt about it. I did a podcast with Brandon Mitchell, who's the CEO at Place Technology. Shout out to Place Technology. And we talked about this, right? Listening for leadership is a superpower, but not just listening to provide solutions, but listening to understand, kind of talking about that third point in that communication that we talked about. That's another, I think, really, really great way of being a great collaborator. Another one, and this one's tough, right? And I think it goes at a being supportive and positive, right? I think there's always things inside of a business, and I know people tell me it's like, Chris, it's not always sunshine and roses, right? I agree. Definitely in the macro environment that we're in right now, there's not, it's balanced, right? But I think there's always a silver lining in situations, right? And like I've always looked at it from the lens as like, what is me being negative? What is me being confrontational? What is me being like, how is that going to help the situation? Right? Like, how's that going to make cash burn decrease? Like, how's that gonna make our runway better? How's that gonna affect our net dollar retention rate, right? Like, how's that gonna like affect us of being able to, have an outlook on it, right? So, and I know that's always difficult. And for me, that is always like a balance, right? Earlier in my career, I would say like I was developing my emotional intelligence. And to me, like that is a really, really critical piece about how do you maintain that outlook and that support through adversity, through challenge, and through difficulty. I always call it like an emotional baseline. How are you making sure you maintain that? And I think another useful tip outside of the ones that I've gave is being flexible and adaptable, right? Like be flexible. Like, we're I think so many times one of the stereotypes a lot of people have about working with finance, right, is like, man, they're some of the most rigid, inflexible people I've ever had the chance of working with, right? And a lot of times when you're coming into that fostering that business partnership, you got to break a lot of those stereotypes down, right? And that's a common stereotype that I hear from, clients that I work with, prospects that we talk to. They're just like, man, I'm so used to working with like super rigid and like super, they only see it from this lens and that's the only perspective. And you got to do it this way. And that's the only outcome. You do it the way that it's set out and it's the way that we've been doing it and it's successful, right? But I think like obviously with the change of business and so much change and adversity that's rapidly happening, you have to have that adaptability and that flexibility in terms of that partnership and that collaboration that you're trying to have with the business. So those are some bonus ones. And for me, I think like in summary, like wrapping this up and tying this together, collaboration for the office of the CFO and finance professionals. Like, I don't know about you, but Bart and Chat GPT and GPT-4 and name all the other like Google and internet and website plugins that you can have around AI. It's like one pops up every day. Like in my email box, it's like ClickUp, here's ClickUp's AI, and here's Canva's AI. It's like everybody's getting AI in there. And I can tell you, like, collaboration is one of those high value activities that's going to resonate higher, right? And if you're looking at, hey, do I want to become a better calculator or do I want to become a better collaborator? I can tell you right now with a lot of confidence, man, shift your mindset, shift your opportunities, shift your skill set and perspectives to being that great collaborator, right? Because calculations and then like that piece of it, there's a lot more use cases and flexibility of where a lot of these tools can help solve that pain. We need to level ourselves up. And I think it's also one of the biggest opportunities too, right? I don't know about you, but I never took on the CPA exam, business collaboration 101, right? Like I never took that as it may be on the new CPA exam. I'm not throwing shade. It might be on there, right? But I never took that in my MBA class of like, the psychology of business collaboration, the advanced course. I didn't take that, right? So as you can take away a lot of what we talked about here today and instantly go apply that, right? Like go apply that with your business partnership. Maybe on this upcoming Monday when it's May 1st, right? You can start to say, hey, I want to become a better collaborator, right? I know there's some things that I could get better at. I know Chris gave me some great phrases I can say, some great use cases that I can go apply. I know some elements where we could work together. Like I'm really going to challenge myself to become a better collaborator. And I think for me, my advice to everybody watching this is like that real time in the moment. I'm going to choose to do this project or I'm going to take on this initiative for May. I'm going to find this project that I want to collaborate with the business on. I'm going to find this KPI that I want to partner with the business on and collaborate how we improve it. Those are really the great test and use cases where you start building this skill set and this mindset, right? So for me, hopefully this was really helpful. If you found this super valuable, make sure to check us out on our YouTube page. Go follow us. If you want to learn more about Fresh FP&A, check out our website, www.freshfpa.com. Every Friday, we do Fresh CFO Fridays, and we talk about different topics for accounting, finance, FP&A, CFO, and fractional CFO professionals. So make sure to like, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell on our YouTube page. That way you don't miss any future future CFO Fridays. And as I always end, keep pushing, never settle, and the best is yet to come. Let's get it.